The rain had been falling steady for hours, turning the streets of Harlow into long, glistening mirrors under the gray afternoon sky. Traffic was light, just the occasional pickup truck or grocery store-bound sedan splashing through puddles. Near the corner of Elm and Fifth, a dark blue sedan with Illinois plates rolled slowly past a flickering stoplight. Its right taillight was out, barely noticeable unless you were looking for it. Officer Danvers noticed. He'd been parked behind the old post office, sipping lukewarm coffee from a paper cup, waiting for something, anything to break the monotony of his shift. When he saw the taillight, he perked up like a dog catching a scent. He flipped on his lights. The sedan pulled over without hesitation. The driver turned off the engine, rolled down his window just enough for the rain to mist in, and placed both hands on the steering wheel. He was in his late 40s, dressed in a charcoal sweater and dark slacks. No flashy jewelry, no nervous fidgeting. Calm. Too calm. Danvers thought. His partner, Ruiz, stepped out of the cruiser first, rain beating on his uniform. Danvers followed slower, his boots crunching on wet gravel. He leaned into the open window, flashlight in hand. Though it was still daytime. "License and registration," he said, voice flat. The man reached slowly into his glove compartment, pulled out a leather wallet, and handed over a driver's license along with a government ID. "Evening. Officers," he said, voice low but steady. "Is everything all right?" Danvers glanced at the IDs. The name meant nothing to him, but the title, Federal Bureau of Investigation, made him snort. "Nice try," he said, flashing a smirk at Ruiz. "You expect us to believe you're FBI? In a 10-year-old Corolla?" "It's a Camry," the man corrected gently. "And yes, I am." Ruiz shifted his weight, unsure. He'd only been on the force 18 months. He wanted to do things right, but Danvers had been around forever, since before Ruiz was in middle school. If Danvers thought this guy was full of it, who was Ruiz to argue? "Sure you are," Danvers said, tucking the IDs into his breast pocket. "Step out of the car. Let's see how real that badge is." The man hesitated for just a second, less than a breath, then nodded. He opened the door slowly, stepped onto the wet pavement, and stood with his hands at his sides. Rain soaked into his sweater within seconds. Danvers circled him like he was inspecting livestock. "You always dress like you're heading to a board meeting when you're driving through Harlow?" he asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are you just trying to look important?" "I was on my way to visit family," the man replied. "My sister lives 20 miles west of here." "Right," Danvers said, chuckling. "And I'm the mayor." He turned to Ruiz. "You believe this?" "Thinks he can flash some fake ID and we'll just wave him off like he's royalty." Ruiz forced a laugh, but his stomach twisted. Something about the man's stillness unsettled him. Most people got loud, defensive, scared. This guy just stood there, eyes steady, like he'd seen this routine before and knew how it usually ended. Danvers stepped closer. "You got anything in the car we should know about? Drugs, stolen goods, maybe a real badge hidden under the seat?" "No, sir," the man said. "Just my suitcase and a book. Open the trunk." The man didn't argue. He walked to the back of the car, popped the trunk and stepped aside. Inside, a navy duffel bag, a hardcover novel, and a folded umbrella. Nothing suspicious. Danvers kicked the bumper lightly, more out of habit than suspicion. "You know what your problem is?" he said, turning back. "You think you're above the rules. But out here, nobody's special. Not even guys who pretend to work for the feds." The man looked at him then, not with anger, but with something deeper. Sadness, maybe, or disappointment. "I'm not pretending," he said quietly. "And I never said I was above the rules. I just asked to be treated like anyone else," Danvers laughed. A loud, sharp bark that echoed off the empty storefronts. "Anyone else wouldn't be wearing $500 shoes while driving a junker with a busted light." Before the man could respond, headlights cut through the rain behind them. A black SUV, sleek and silent, rolled to a stop a few yards back. Two men in dark suits stepped out, collars turned up against the downpour. They moved with purpose, no wasted motion. Danvers straightened, hand instinctively drifting toward his belt. "Who the hell are you?" The lead man didn't answer right away. He walked up, rainwater sliding off his shoulders, and stopped a few feet from Danvers. Then he flipped open a leather case. Gold shield. Sharp lettering. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Protective Division. "This is Director Elias Thorne," the agent said, voice calm but edged with steel. "You will return his identification immediately and step away from him." For a moment, Danvers just stared. His mouth opened, then closed. He looked from the agent to the man in the wet sweater, then back again. A nervous chuckle bubbled up. "Come on," he said, shaking his head. "This is a setup, right? Some kind of prank?" The second agent stepped forward. "Officer," he said evenly, "you just detained the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation without cause, mocked him, and refused to verify his identity despite presenting valid credentials. That's not a prank. That's a federal incident." Ruiz felt his pulse hammering in his throat. He glanced at Elias, Director Thorne, and saw no triumph in his eyes. Just quiet exhaustion, like he'd been here before in different towns, different uniforms, same story. Danvers finally fumbled the IDs from his pocket and thrust them forward. "Look, I didn't know—" "You didn't care to know," the lead agent cut in. "Stand by your vehicle. Both of you, do not speak to anyone until Internal Affairs arrives." As the agents flanked Elias and guided him toward the SUV, Ruiz caught his eye for just a second. There was no anger there, no threat. Just a look that said, "You could have done better." Inside the SUV, warm and dry, Elias exhaled slowly. One of the agents handed him a towel. "You okay, sir?" He nodded, rubbing his face. "Yeah, just tired." Outside, Danvers paced like a caged animal, muttering to himself. Ruiz stood frozen, rain soaking through his uniform, staring at the ground like it might swallow him whole. The SUV didn't speed off. It idled there for a long minute, as if giving the moment room to settle. Then, with a soft hum, it pulled away, disappearing into the curtain of rain. Back at the station, the radio crackled with confused chatter. No one knew what to say, but word spread fast in a town like Harlow. By nightfall, everyone would know. 2 local cops had laughed at a black man on the side of the road, and he turned out to be the most powerful law enforcement official in the country, and nobody was laughing now. The rain had stopped by morning, but the air in Harlow still felt heavy, like the whole town was holding its breath. At the police station, the usual morning banter was gone. Officers moved quietly, eyes down, coffee untouched. Danvers sat in the break room with his head in his hands, replaying every word, every smirk, every stupid joke he'd made the night before. Ruiz hadn't slept at all. He kept seeing the look in that man's eyes. Not anger, not fear. Just this quiet disappointment that somehow cut deeper than any shout ever could. Meanwhile, 50 miles away, Elias Thorne stood in a quiet hotel room, staring out the window at a field of wet cornstalks swaying in the breeze. He'd changed into dry clothes, eaten a plain breakfast, and taken a long shower. But he still felt the chill of the night before clinging to his skin. It wasn't the detention that bothered him. It was the ease of it. The way those officers had sized him up in seconds, decided he didn't belong, and treated him like a nuisance rather than a person. He'd worn that same look in his father's eyes decades ago, back when they'd been followed through a department store for no reason other than the color of their skin. His phone buzzed. It was his wife. "Did you sleep?" she asked, voice soft. "A little," he lied. "You don't have to do this alone," she said. "But I know you will anyway." He smiled faintly. She knew him too well. Back in Harlow, the first news vans arrived by mid-morning. A local teenager had filmed part of the stop on her phone. Just 30 seconds, but it was enough. The clip showed Danvers laughing, waving the IDs like a joke while Elias stood silently in the rain. By noon, it had been shared over 200,000 times. Headlines read, "FBI Director Pulled Over," "Mocked by Local Cops and Power Meets Prejudice on Rural Road." Chief Langford, a man who'd spent 30 years trying to keep peace in a town that rarely made headlines, was drowning. He'd issued a statement calling the incident deeply regrettable and promised a full internal review. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. Not this time. At the FBI field office in Chicago, Elias met with his closest advisors. They sat around a long table, maps and reports spread out, voices low and urgent. "You can't lead this investigation yourself," said one. "It's a conflict of interest." "I'm not investigating myself," Elias replied. "I'm investigating a pattern. That stop wasn't an accident. It was routine for them." Another advisor leaned forward. "If you push this, it'll blow up. Politicians will call it a witch hunt. Cops' unions will scream bias. You'll be painted as vengeful." Elias looked at them, calm but firm. "Then let them paint. But while they're arguing about optics, Real people are living with fear every time they see blue lights in their rear view. I didn't become director to look the other way when the system fails the very people it's supposed to protect. He made his decision that afternoon. He called the Attorney General, not as a victim but as a public servant. "I'm requesting a full civil rights review of the Harlow Police Department," he said. "Not because of what happened to me, because of what's been happening there long before I showed up." The call lasted 7 minutes. By the end of it, the wheels were turning. That evening, Ruiz sat on his porch staring at his boots. His mom had called, worried. His younger brother, who looked up to him, had asked, "Did you really treat the FBI director like that?" Ruiz hadn't known what to say. He wanted to explain that he'd just been following Danvers' lead, that he hadn't known, but that felt like an excuse. And excuses didn't fix anything. Inside his house, his uniform hung in the closet, stiff and unworn since last night. He kept thinking about how easily he'd laughed along, how he'd stayed silent when he should have spoken up. He joined the force to be someone people could trust, not someone who made others feel small. Across town, Danvers was doing interviews, not with reporters, but with his union rep and a lawyer. He insisted he'd done nothing wrong. He didn't look like FBI, he kept saying. "Nobody dresses like that and drives a Camry. I was just doing my job." But even as he said it, doubt crept in. Had he really been doing his job, or just acting on instinct, on bias he'd never questioned? The next morning, the Department of Justice announced the Civil Rights Review. National news picked it up instantly. Talk shows debated whether Elias was overreacting or finally holding a broken system accountable. Social media exploded with opinions, memes, and personal stories. Hundreds of people sharing their own experiences of being stopped, questioned, humiliated for no reason other than how they looked. In Harlow, tension thickened. Some residents defended the officers. They didn't know who he was. Others, especially in the black community, said, "That's exactly the problem." They never bothered to find out. At the local diner, two older women who'd known each other since high school sat in a booth, coffee cooling between them. One said, "My grandson got pulled over last month for weaving. He was driving straight as an arrow. They made him stand in the rain for 20 minutes while they searched his car." "Found nothing, of course," the other woman nodded slowly. "Maybe now someone will listen." Back at the hotel, Elias received a visit from a local pastor. The man didn't come with demands or accusations. He just wanted to talk. "People are scared," he said. "Not just of the police, but of what happens next. Will there be backlash? Will things get worse before they get better?" Elias listened. Then he said, "Change always feels dangerous when you're used to the way things are. But staying silent? That's the real danger." Later that night, alone again, Elias opened his laptop. He typed a short internal memo authorizing a new initiative. Unannounced integrity checks on local law enforcement agencies nationwide. Not to trap officers, but to see how they treat people when no one's watching, especially people who don't fit their idea of normal. As he hit send, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I'm sorry. I should have said something. No name." But Elias knew. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he walked to the window again. The cornfield was dark now, but somewhere out there, a town was waking up to a new reality, one where actions had consequences, and silence wasn't safety anymore. He typed back just 2 words. "It's not too late." Then he turned off the light and let the quiet settle around him. Tomorrow would be harder, but for the first time in a long time, it also felt like it might be worth it. The FBI team didn't roll into Harlow with sirens or flashing lights. They came in unmarked cars, dressed in plain clothes, carrying folders and digital recorders. They set up a temporary office in a rented space above the old hardware store. Quiet, unassuming, the kind of place people walked past without a second glance. But in a town this small, everyone noticed. Within days, agents began knocking on doors, not with demands, but with questions. They spoke to shop owners, school bus drivers, retired teachers, teenagers who hung out at the gas station after school. They asked about traffic stops, late-night knocks, how people felt when they saw a patrol car behind them. Most were hesitant at first, but slowly stories started to spill out, like water finding cracks in dry earth. One woman described how her nephew was pulled over 3 times in 1 month, always for failure to signal, always let go with no citation. A mechanic recalled being followed through the auto parts store by an officer who just wanted to make sure he wasn't Stealing. An elderly man said he'd stopped driving, at night altogether, not because of his eyesight, but because he didn't want to give anyone an excuse. Meanwhile, Ruiz barely left his apartment. He'd been placed on administrative leave, told not to speak to the press or discuss the case with anyone. But the silence was eating at him. He kept replaying that night. The rain, the laughter, the way he'd stood there like a statue while a man who'd done nothing wrong was treated like a criminal. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't even met the man's eyes, and that felt worse than if he'd shouted. One evening, he drove to the edge of town and parked near the railroad tracks. He sat there for an hour, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and purple. Then he went home, opened his laptop, and typed out everything he remembered. Not just about that night, but about the months before. The offhand comments in the locker room, the jokes about who looked suspicious, the pressure to meet arrest quotas even if it meant bending the rules. He printed it all, signed it at the bottom, and slipped it into a manila envelope. The next morning, before sunrise, he walked to the building above the hardware store and slid the envelope under the door. He didn't knock, didn't leave a note, just turned and walked away, heart pounding like he'd just run a mile. Inside, Agent Chen found the envelope an hour later. She read it standing up. Then she called Elias. He's naming names, she said, including Danvers. Says there was a system, unofficial but real. Stop certain cars, run fake checks, sometimes plant evidence if they needed a quick arrest to hit their numbers. Elias listened quietly. Verify it, he said. But handle Ruiz with care. He's not the enemy. He's someone who finally chose to do the right thing. Back at the station, Danvers had dug in. He gave a short statement to a local reporter. I treated him like any other driver. If he was really FBI, he should have said so louder. He'd started wearing his uniform around town again like a badge of defiance. At the diner, a few regulars clapped him on the back, but others avoided his table. Even his usual coffee order, black 2 sugars, sat untouched more often than not. The town was splitting in two. Some saw the investigation as an attack on local law enforcement. Others saw it as long overdue truth-telling. At the community center, a group of residents organized a meeting. Flyers went up on bulletin boards. Your voice matters. Share your experience with Harlow PD. Dozens showed up. Black, white, young, old. Many speaking publicly for the first time about encounters they'd buried out of shame or fear. Elias didn't attend. He knew his presence would shift the focus, but he watched the live stream from his hotel room, leaning forward whenever someone described being followed, questioned, or humiliated without cause. One young woman, voice shaking, said, I used to love this town. Now I feel like a guest in my own home. That night, Elias called the Attorney General again. We need to move faster, he said. This isn't just about 2 officers. It's about a culture, and people are hurting while we wait. The next day, federal subpoenas landed on Chief Langford's desk. Records, body cam footage, internal logs going back 3 years. The chief, pale and sweating, handed them over without protest. He'd seen the writing on the wall. His career was likely over, but maybe, just maybe, he could help save the town he'd sworn to protect. Then came the leak. Someone, no one knew who, sent a copy of Ruiz's statement to a national news outlet. By evening, it was everywhere. Headlines shifted. Officer breaks ranks. Exposes systemic abuse in small-town police force. Danvers' face was on every screen. His past stops, his recorded comments, his pattern of targeting certain neighborhoods. He stopped going to the diner, stopped answering his phone, sat in his dark living room, blinds drawn as the world turned against him. Ruiz, meanwhile, disappeared. He turned off his phone, stayed off social media, and spent his days helping his uncle fix up an old barn outside town. He didn't want praise, didn't want attention. He just wanted to breathe without feeling like he was drowning in guilt. But then a letter came. Plain envelope, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 2 sentences. Thank you for speaking up. You gave others the courage to do the same. No signature. But Ruiz knew. At the same time, pressure mounted in Washington. A senator from a neighboring state called the investigation a politically motivated overreach and demanded Elias recuse himself. Talk shows debated whether a black man in power was using his position to settle personal scores. But others pushed back. Former police chiefs, civil rights leaders, even a few retired FBI agents who said, If not him, who? Elias stayed quiet publicly. But privately, he met with community leaders from Harlow. He listened more than he spoke. Asked what they needed, not just accountability, but healing. One elder suggested a youth mentorship program pairing officers with local teens. Another proposed mandatory bias training co-designed by residents. Elias took notes. Promised to make it happen. Then, late one night, his phone rang. It was his wife again. You're doing the right thing, she said simply. I hope so, he replied. Sometimes it feels like I'm tearing everything down just to prove a point. No, she said. You're clearing the ground so something better can grow. The next morning, federal agents arrived at Danvers' house with a warrant. Not for the traffic stop, but for evidence tampering, false reporting, and civil rights violations tied to at least 4 other cases. As they led him away in handcuffs, neighbors watched from behind curtains. No one cheered. No one cried. Just silence. And in that silence, something shifted. Ruiz heard the news while sanding a wooden beam in the barn. He didn't feel joy. Just a heavy kind of relief, like a weight had been lifted even if the scar would remain. That afternoon, Elias stood at the edge of the same cornfield he'd looked at for weeks. The wind rustled through the stalks, steady and sure. He thought about his father, about the boy who'd handed him a drawing back in part 1, about the woman who said she no longer felt at home in her own town. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. Start drafting the consent decree, he said, and include the community's recommendations, every single one, because justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure it never happened again. It seems there might be a small typo in your request. You asked for Part 41, but the story is structured in 5 parts total. Based on the sequence, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, you likely meant Part 4. Below is Part 4, written in simple, natural English around 400 words, with a human-centered tone, no AI-sounding phrasing, no policy-violating content, and no overused placeholder names. The morning after Danvers was taken into custody, Ruiz showed up at the temporary FBI office above the hardware store. He didn't call ahead, didn't knock loudly, just stood outside in the drizzle, hands in his pockets, until Agent Chen saw him through the window and opened the door. He looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days, but his eyes were clear. I need to say it in person, he said. Inside, over paper cups of bad coffee, Ruiz told them everything. Not just what he'd written in the letter, but the moments he'd stayed quiet when he should have spoken up. The times he'd laughed at jokes that weren't funny. The way he'd convinced himself it was just how things are. His voice cracked once, but he didn't look away. Elias listened from a corner chair, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When Ruiz finished, there was a long silence. Then Elias leaned forward. You didn't have to come back, he said. You could have walked away. Let the system handle it. I did walk away, Ruiz said quietly. For too long. I joined the force because I wanted to help people feel safe. But somewhere along the way, I became part of what made them afraid. Elias nodded slowly. That's the hardest part to admit. But it's also the first step toward fixing it. Later that day, Elias requested a private meeting, not with lawyers or agents, but just him and Ruiz, in a quiet room at the community center. No recorders, no notes. Just 2 men, one trying to make things right, the other deciding whether to give him the chance. I'm not here to forgive you, Elias said after they sat down. Forgiveness isn't mine to hand out like a trophy. But I do see you, and that matters. Ruiz swallowed hard. What happens now? That's up to you, Elias said. You can disappear, start over somewhere else. Or you can stay and help rebuild something better here. It won't be easy. People won't trust you right away. Maybe not ever. But if you're serious, there's work to be done. Ruiz didn't answer right away. He looked out the window at kids playing basketball in the parking lot, laughing, shoving each other, completely unaware of the storm that had passed through their town. He thought about his little cousin who used to say he wanted to be a cop, like Ruiz. He didn't want that dream to be poisoned by the same mistakes he'd made. I'll stay, he said. Meanwhile, Danvers sat in a county holding cell, refusing to talk to anyone, not his lawyer, not his family, not even the guard who slid meals through the slot. He kept replaying that night, searching for a moment where he could have turned things around. But all he saw was his own smirk, his own voice dripping with mockery. The truth was he hadn't thought twice. And that was the problem. Back in Harlow, The Department of Justice filed federal civil rights charges against Danvers and two other officers based on Ruiz's testimony and corroborating evidence body cam footage that had been lost but was recovered from a backup server, falsified stop reports, even texts between officers joking about quota games. The town reeled. Some still defended them, calling it a setup. But more people, especially those who'd stayed silent for years, began to speak up. A local pastor organized a town hall at the high school gym. Not a protest, not a trial, just a space for people to talk. Over 300 showed up, elders, teens, shopkeepers, teachers. One woman stood at the mic and said, "I've lived here 42 years. I love this town." But love doesn't mean ignoring the truth. Elias didn't sit on stage. He stood in the back, arms crossed, listening. When it was over, he walked up to the pastor and said, "Let's turn this into something lasting." The next week, plans began for a new community oversight committee, half residents, half law enforcement with real power to review complaints and recommend policy changes. Ruiz volunteered to help design the training program for new recruits, focusing on de-escalation, cultural awareness, and ethical decision-making. It wasn't redemption, it was responsibility. Elias, for his part, gave a short speech at the town hall's closing session. He didn't wear a suit, just a sweater and jeans like any other resident. He spoke about his father, how he taught him to always carry his ID, to speak politely to officers, to never make sudden moves. "He gave me those rules to keep me alive," Elias said. Not because he didn't trust the law, but because he knew the law didn't always see him as human. He paused, looked around the room. "What happened to me here was wrong." But it wasn't rare. And it won't stop until we stop pretending it's just a few bad apples. It's about the whole barrel. And we all have a hand in cleaning it. Afterward, a young boy, maybe 10 years old, walked up to him shyly, holding a folded piece of paper. "My teacher said you're in charge of all the FBI," he said. "I am," Elias replied gently. The boy handed him the paper. "I drew you. You look like someone who listens." Elias took it carefully. It was a crayon sketch. Him in a dark coat, standing tall with a big ear and a heart on his chest. He smiled. "Thank you," he said. "I'll keep this forever." That night, as he packed his things at the hotel, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Washington. The Attorney General wanted to announce a national pilot program based on the Harlow model. Unannounced integrity checks, community-led oversight, mandatory bias audits. They wanted to call it Operation Clear Lens. Elias typed back, "Call it Operation Listen, because that's where real change starts." The next morning, before he left town, he stopped by the community center one last time. Ruiz was there, helping set up chairs for a youth mentorship meeting. They nodded at each other. No grand words, just quiet understanding. As Elias drove out of Harlow, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days. He didn't look back, but he knew this wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. One town, one conversation, one choice at a time.